Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is Pro-Revenge Story. I was working as a civilian contractor with the U.S. military overseas in 2023 and lived off base in an apartment complex popular among military personnel. One Tuesday morning in April, I accidentally hit another soldier's vehicle in the parking lot. When I got out to check the damage, I noticed both our cars were what you could call hoopties. Old beaters that get passed around from one service member to another, typically selling for $1,000 to $2,000. I immediately recognized I was at fault for the accident. It was very minor. His rear bumper had a small dent. Both our cars were still running fine. I approached the driver who had already stepped out. He was in uniform, looking irritated. "Hey man, I'm really sorry about that," I said, extending my hand. "I'm Mike." He ignored my handshake. "Martinez," he replied curtly. "Look, if it's all right with you, I'd like to negotiate a cash payment and keep this simple. No need to involve authorities," I suggested. To be honest, the accident was so minor I half expected him to say, "Nah man, it's good," but I was prepared to pay him something reasonable. I've always believed that if you have a fender bender and can negotiate agreeable terms between both parties, it's best to avoid insurance and police. Martinez scowled. "I want to call the police." "We could do that, or we could go on base together and I could give you $300 cash," I offered. "That's not enough," he snapped. "Okay, how about $500? I countered. Without warning, Martinez punched me squarely in the face. It was a complete sucker punch. Before I could recover, he jumped into his car and took off, nearly running me over in the process. Fortunately, I had a dash cam in my car that recorded everything. I drove to the Provost Marshal's office on base, the military police station, and reported both the accident and the assault, showing the MP the footage. They used his license plate to track him down. The officer also asked if I wanted to involve local authorities or press criminal charges off base. "Not at this time," I replied. I genuinely felt the soldier would learn his lesson if I let the UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice, handle this. The military court seemed sufficient. The result was that Martinez received 60 days of extra duty, reduction in rank, and forfeiture of a portion of his paycheck. If he dealt with that punishment properly, this would have been the end of our ordeal. I assumed the matter was closed. About 2 weeks later, in early May, I was shopping at the commissary on base when Martinez spotted me in the frozen food section. "You piece of crap," he hissed, approaching me aggressively. "You just had to report me, didn't you?" "You need to calm down," I told him firmly. "You should learn your lesson and move on. You're just a pussy who doesn't know how to take a punch," he sneered. "I held back from completely destroying your life," I reminded him. "Be grateful for that." He jabbed a finger at my chest. "I've already been punished, and you can't touch me again. This is over." Martinez stormed off, leaving me standing there with my shopping cart. A store employee behind the nearby deli counter had witnessed the entire exchange. "That guy seems unhinged," the employee, whose name tag read Jackson, commented. "Yeah, he is," I replied. "Would you mind giving me your contact info? I might need a witness." I got Jackson's details and reported this interaction to Martinez's command. His commander, Captain Reynolds, told me Martinez had been ordered to avoid contact with me. "I strongly recommend you involve the local authorities," Reynolds advised. "This soldier clearly isn't learning his lesson." So that's what I did. I contacted an attorney named Weiss. He was unsure if we could successfully sue Martinez and required a cash payment to take the case. I was angry and determined to teach this guy a lesson, so I agreed, despite the substantial cost. To keep this part brief, we ended up in a court off base by late June. We presented our evidence, including the dashcam footage and testimony from Jackson. Martinez had decided to represent himself, which proved disastrous for him. Throughout the proceedings, he had multiple outbursts, interrupting both my attorney and the judge. "This is all bullcrap," he shouted during my testimony. "Control yourself or I'll hold you in contempt," the judge warned. When the judgment came down, the judge granted me approximately $50,000. Martinez exploded. "You son of an idiot, the Army will cover for me." The judge's face hardened. "I'm adjusting the judgment to $80,000, he declared, then turned to me. "Would you also like to press criminal charges against this individual?" It was obvious Martinez wasn't going to learn his lesson. "Yes, Your Honor, I would," I replied. Later, Attorney Weiss advised me about pursuing an international hold. If you ever want to see that money, this is your best option, he explained. With your judgment, a judge would likely grant an international hold, which would prevent him from leaving the country until the debt is paid. According to the agreement between the U.S. military and the host country, they would honor this hold. The military won't protect him or move him out of country to avoid payment. By this point, I had already paid my lawyer thousands of dollars and didn't want it all to be for nothing. Let's do it, I told Weiss. I want the international hold. About a month later, by August 2023, the international hold was granted, and the U.S. military was informed. 2 months after that, the criminal case concluded with Martinez sentenced to 90 days in jail. By then, his commander had moved him onto the base, into the barracks. I remember receiving the call when the MPs handed him over to local authorities to begin his sentence, and he still owed me $80,000. I heard nothing for almost a year. Then in July 2024, I got a call from Captain Reynolds. He wanted me to make a statement regarding the case. When I went in, I discovered the military was processing Martinez for separation, essentially kicking him out of the army. Reynolds also mentioned Martinez was close to raising the money to pay me so he could have the international hold lifted. Would your lawyer be willing to make a statement as well? Reynolds asked. I'll ask him, I said, and later contacted Weiss, who agreed to provide a statement about the facts of the case. A few weeks later, a woman named Diane called me. I'm Martinez's ex-wife, she explained. When this all started, we were married, but I divorced him last year. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, though I wasn't particularly surprised. He has the money to pay you now, she continued. He needs to know how to get it to you so the hold can be lifted. I provided her with the payment details, and a few days later I received the full $80,000. I contacted Diane to confirm. How did he manage to get the money? I asked out of curiosity. He maxed out his credit cards and his family helped with the rest, she explained. The army has discharged him. He just wants to come home now. I'll send the receipt right away, I told her. I emailed her the confirmation, and that was the last I ever heard from anyone connected to Martinez. Sometimes I wonder if he finally learned his lesson, but either way, justice was served. The next one is an entitled people story. So this happened a few months ago, and I'm still shaking my head at the absolute audacity of some people. I inherited this beautiful beach house from my grandmother about 3 years back. It's nothing fancy, just a cozy 2-bedroom cottage right on the sand with weathered shingles and a wraparound porch that faces the ocean. The kind of place where you can hear the waves from every room and watch the sunrise with your morning coffee. Now here's where it gets interesting. The property sits in this weird spot where it's technically part of a larger beach community that formed an HOA about 15 years ago. But my grandmother's house was built way before any of that nonsense started. She bought the land and built the house back in the 70s, long before the surrounding area got developed into the pretentious little enclave it became. When I inherited the place, I did my due diligence. Had lawyers look over everything, made sure the deed was clean, property taxes were up to date, the whole 9 yards. The house was mine, free and clear, with no HOA obligations because it predated their formation by decades. My grandmother had been grandfathered in, so to speak, and that protection transferred to me. But apparently nobody told the current HOA board that. I'd been going down to the beach house maybe once a month, sometimes bringing friends or family for weekend getaways. It's about a 4-hour drive from where I live, so it made for perfect mini vacations. The neighbors seemed friendly enough when I'd run into them on the beach or at the little grocery store in town. I kept the property neat, didn't throw parties, and basically minded my own business. That all changed when Mrs. Patterson became HOA president. This woman was something else. Picture the most stereotypical HOA president you can imagine, then dial it up to 11. She had short gray hair that looked like it was styled with a bowl and spray glue, always wore these matching tracksuits in various shades of beige, and carried around a little notebook where she'd write down every tiny infraction she spotted. The woman treated the neighborhood like her personal fiefdom. About 2 months after she took over as president, I started getting letters. The first one was about my outdoor shower, claiming it violated some aesthetic guideline. Then came complaints about my fishing equipment being visible on the porch, my beach chairs being the wrong color, and my failure to maintain landscaping that met community standards. I ignored them at first because, legally speaking, I didn't answer to the HOA. My property wasn't subject to their rules, but the letters kept coming, getting more aggressive each time. Mrs. Patterson seemed to take my lack of response as a personal insult. Things escalated when I decided to repaint the house. My grandmother had kept it a classic New England white with dark green shutters, but the paint was peeling pretty badly after facing decades of salt air. I chose a nice soft blue color, something that would complement the ocean and give the place a fresh look. Nothing crazy, just a pleasant coastal blue that you'd see on half the beach houses up and down the coast. Apparently this was war. The morning after I finished painting, there was Mrs. Patterson standing in my driveway with 2 other board members, looking like she was about to burst a blood vessel. She informed me that blue was not an approved color according to the HOA architectural guidelines and that I had violated multiple covenants. When I politely explained that my property wasn't subject to HOA rules, she got this look on her face like I just told her the earth was flat. She started ranting about property values and community standards and how everyone had to follow the rules. I tried to explain the legal situation again, but she cut me off and stormed away, muttering something about getting lawyers involved. I figured that would be the end of it. Boy, was I wrong. 2 weeks later, I got a certified letter that made my jaw drop. The HOA was claiming that my property had somehow been absorbed into their jurisdiction through something called adverse possession, and that I was now subject to all their rules and regulations. Furthermore, they were demanding immediate compliance with their architectural standards, including repainting the house back to white and removing all non-approved outdoor fixtures. The letter was signed by some lawyer they'd hired, making it look all official and intimidating. But the real kicker was the final paragraph. They were giving me exactly 17 hours to either comply with their demands or vacate the property, which they now claimed belonged to the HOA due to my repeated violations of community covenants. 17 hours. Not 17 days. Not even 17 hours from when I received the letter. 17 hours from the timestamp on the letter, which meant I supposedly had about 4 hours left when I actually got it. I called my lawyer immediately, and he basically laughed when I read him the letter. He explained that adverse possession doesn't work that way, especially not over a couple months of paint color disputes. The whole thing was legally ridiculous. But then he said something that got my wheels turning. Since they'd made this demand in writing with such a specific time frame, and since they'd claimed ownership of my property, I could either fight it in court or I could give them exactly what they'd asked for. That's when the malicious compliance idea hit me. See, the letter didn't just demand that I leave. It specifically stated that the HOA was asserting ownership of the property and all structures thereon, and that I needed to vacate so they could take possession. They wanted to own my beach house? Fine. Let them own it. All of it. I spent the next few hours making phone calls and arrangements. First, I called the county tax assessor's office and asked about the process for transferring tax liability on a property. Turns out, if someone claims ownership of your property, they can be held responsible for the taxes, especially if they're trying to take possession. Then I called my insurance company and explained the situation. Since the HOA was claiming ownership, I wanted to cancel my homeowner's policy immediately. After all, why would I insure a house that allegedly wasn't mine? Next call was to the utility companies. Electric, water, trash collection, internet, the works. I explained that I was no longer the property owner according to a letter from the HOA, and I needed all services disconnected from my name immediately. But here's where it got really interesting. I called the town building inspector and reported that someone had claimed ownership of a property that had several unpermitted modifications made over the years. My grandmother had enclosed part of the porch and added that outdoor shower without pulling permits, and the town had never gotten around to addressing it. Since the HOA now claimed ownership, they'd be responsible for bringing everything up to code. I also remembered that there was an ongoing issue with coastal erosion that the state environmental agency had flagged. The property was going to need expensive seawall reinforcement work within the next few years to prevent foundation damage, another problem for the new owners. Finally, I drove down to the beach house one last time and removed every single personal item I could fit in my car. Furniture, appliances, linens, dishes, tools, fishing gear, everything. The letter had demanded that I vacate, and I was going to comply completely. They wanted an empty house? They'd get an empty house. I left the keys on the kitchen counter along with a note thanking the HOA for relieving me of the burden of beach house ownership, and drove home. The fun started the next morning. Mrs. Patterson called me at 7 a.m., screaming about how I couldn't just abandon the property. I calmly reminded her that according to their letter, it wasn't my property anymore. They'd claimed ownership. I'd vacated as demanded. What more did they want? Apparently, they wanted me to keep paying for everything. The utility companies started calling the HOA directly when services needed maintenance or when bills went unpaid. Turns out, when you claim ownership of a property, utility companies expect the new owners to take over the accounts. Then the tax bills started arriving. The county was more than happy to transfer the tax burden to the new owners of record. Mrs. Patterson called me 3 times that week, each time more frantic than the last, demanding that I continue paying the property taxes on a house I apparently didn't own. The building inspector showed up for his visit and found enough code violations to keep the HOA busy for months. The unpermitted additions, some electrical work that wasn't up to current standards, and a septic system that needed updating. He handed Mrs. Patterson a citation requiring immediate compliance with all building codes, with fines starting at $500 per day for non-compliance. But the real cherry on top came when the state environmental agency contacted the HOA about the required seawall work. The estimate for the coastal protection project came in at just over $200,000, and it was now the HOA's responsibility as the property owners. Mrs. Patterson's final call to me was something to behold. She was absolutely hysterical, demanding that I take the property back and threatening to sue me for abandonment. I listened patiently while she ranted and then asked her a simple question. Did the HOA still claim ownership of the property or not? Because if they did, then all these expenses and obligations were theirs to handle. If they didn't, then maybe they shouldn't have sent me that letter claiming they owned my house and giving me 17 hours to leave. The silence on the other end of the line was beautiful. It took them 3 more weeks of mounting bills, daily code violation fines, and increasingly angry calls from contractors before the HOA finally sent me a letter formally disclaiming any ownership interest in the property. They wanted me to take it back, but by then, I'd already spoken to several real estate agents about the fair market value of beachfront property in the area. Turns out, even with the needed repairs and improvements, the place was worth significantly more than I'd thought. The HOA's little stunt had actually prompted me to do research I should have done years ago. I sent them a counteroffer. I'd accept the property back, but only after they compensated me for the fair market value of having sole ownership of prime beachfront real estate temporarily transferred away from me. My lawyer calculated the daily rental value of comparable properties, multiplied it by the number of days they'd claimed ownership, and added legal fees. They could pay me the $28,000 they now owed me for the use of my property, plus cover all the utility reconnection fees and reimburse me for the time and expense of moving my belongings twice. Or they could keep the house and deal with all those mounting expenses themselves. Guess which option they chose? I got my check within a week, along with a written apology from the HOA board and a formal acknowledgement that my property was not subject to their jurisdiction. Mrs. Patterson resigned as president shortly after, apparently deciding that retirement communities in Arizona were more her speed than dealing with property law in coastal areas. The best part is that I used their money to hire contractors to fix all the code violations and make the improvements the house actually needed. The place looks amazing now, and it's worth more than ever. I even kept the blue paint, because it turns out the town's only restriction on house colors is that they can't be neon or reflective enough to interfere with navigation lights. I still go down to the beach house regularly, and the neighbors are much friendlier now. Turns out, Mrs. Patterson had been making everyone's life miserable with her overzealous enforcement of increasingly ridiculous rules. With her gone, the HOA actually functions the way it's supposed to, handling genuinely important community issues instead of micromanaging paint colors and fishing equipment. Sometimes people ask me if I felt bad about what happened to the HOA's finances during those weeks when they were stuck with my property expenses. The answer is simple. They got exactly what they demanded. They wanted ownership of my beach house. They got ownership of my beach house. All of it, including every responsibility, expense, and legal obligation that comes with owning beachfront property. Next time, maybe they'll think twice before giving someone 17 hours to abandon prime real estate, especially when they don't actually have any legal right to make such demands in the first place. The ocean view from my porch is still just as beautiful, by the way, even more so now that I can enjoy it without worrying about getting angry letters about the color of my beach chairs. The next one is a petty revenge story. My wife and I were one of the fortunate people that got to see the northern lights where we live. I didn't fully plan on where we were going to view it, so we stopped by a small local park on the way home that offered decent views of the sky. The park technically closes in 30 minutes, so we spent most of the time admiring the northern lights in peace. We were about to leave when the park had 5 minutes left until it closed. Out comes a car from out of nowhere driving towards us as we were entering our car. She rolled down her window and asked us annoyingly, "What the hell are you guys doing here?" I innocently said that we were looking for a clear spot to view the northern lights. Then she said something along the lines of, "Well, that's a good reason for me to call the police on you because you're not supposed to be here." Once again, we made sure it was legal to enter the park because the last thing we wanted was to trespass and get ourselves into trouble. There was no reason for the police to come, and I realized that she's The kicker here is that we live in a rural part of Pennsylvania, and her car had a huge sticker of someone running for the PA House of Representatives for our local district. It's known that PA is a crucial swing state, and our district is purple. I already knew who I was going to vote for, and it wasn't that person the lady is supporting, so I pretended to be an apathetic voter and asked about who that person is. She went on about that person and how great she was. I then said, "Well, I wasn't going to vote, but you just convinced me to go out of my way to register and vote against her and whatever party she's in." Her mouth opened wide and she was left speechless. She then called me racial slurs and threw insults at me. I didn't bother to listen, but I said, "Democracy's an idiot, isn't it? Maybe you should mind your own business next time," while rolling up my window. As we left, I heard a noise that sounded like a popped tire as she kept driving. We were the only 2 cars there, and my tires are fine. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I work as a school janitor. Half my day is spent in the lunchroom emptying the trash cans and sweeping up. At most schools, you get 15+ minutes in between each lunch period to do all the cleaning. At my school, I get less than a full minute, if I'm lucky. Normally, if a trash can isn't full, I just dump one can into another and then tie off that bag when it gets full. It's a lot faster than having to replace every bag every time, and it saves a ton of bags. I also sweep up around the tables, and if I see a big mess under a table, I ask the kids to move their feet and sweep that up too. I do it this way because it's the only way to keep up and keep things clean. If I pulled every bag every time instead of dumping one can into another, not only would I run out of bags halfway through the week, but it would also take way longer. If I only swept under tables when there was no kids sitting there, I would literally never have an opportunity to sweep under tables. Enter the lunch ladies. Most of them are nice, but there's this one older one who is just a miserable human being. She yells at everyone, including the kids, and is just always angry about something. Earlier this week, she yelled at me for dumping one trash can into another instead of pulling the bag. Why she chose today to do this, I don't know, since I'd been doing this every day for the past 3+ years. I know how to do my job and didn't ask her opinion, so I just ignored her, didn't say anything, and kept doing what I was doing. Fast forward an hour or two, and I'm getting a call from my district boss that there was a complaint. The lunch ladies are saying they don't like that I dump cans instead of pulling bags, and they don't like that I sweep under the kids' feet. My boss tells me just stick to cleaning in between lunch periods. I try to explain that that's literally a period of less than a minute, and isn't even a fifth of the amount of time I'd need to do it that way. He says just do it anyway to keep the lunch ladies happy. He's a good dude, but he's just trying to squash complaints and keep them from going further because he doesn't and deal with it. He says from now on, I'm only to empty trash or sweep the floors in between lunches, where there's not students in the cafeteria, and also, I'm to pull the bags every time. No more dumping cans. Cue malicious compliance. Starting then, I only cleaned in between lunches when there was no kids. Of course, this is literally less than 60 seconds, so I only had time to get to half the trash cans. And since I was replacing every bag instead of dumping cans, each can took longer. I didn't even have time to sweep at all. The trash cans I couldn't get to would fill up and overflow, and the kids don't care and just keep piling trash on top. The floor got more and more covered in trash since I didn't have time to sweep at all. I did this for the rest of the week. The same idioty lunch lady tried to scream at me to go empty the trash when I was standing there on Tuesday, but I explained, I was told by my boss that you guys didn't like me sweeping or emptying trash around the kids, so now I'm only allowed to do that when the cafeteria is empty. I'd love to go get that trash can, but there's kids eating lunch right now, so I'm not allowed. She tried to argue, but I just told her I'm following direct and explicit orders from my boss. There was nothing she could do. When the final lunch ended, I cleaned as much as I could before 2 p.m. and then stopped, as that was my lunchtime and the union requires that we take our lunches at our allotted times. It's optional and zero tolerance for deviation. And after my lunch, I have to go clean classrooms since school is out, and classrooms take priority over the cafeteria. End result? The cafeteria never got fully cleaned. When the lunch ladies came in the next day and found it still half filthy, they went through the roof and complained to my boss. He called me in and I explained that I was just follow orders and the lunch ladies were the ones who asked I do things this way. Suffice it to say, I was told to go back to doing it however I thought was best. You want to stick your nose in my business and tell me how to do my job? See how that turns out. Oh, and also since then, I spent the rest of the week calling them out on all the things they were doing wrong. Previously, I just kept my mouth shut and minded my business, but now we're doing this the way you wanted. Door propped open because it's incredibly hot in the kitchen and you need the airflow? Sorry, that's a security issue. Doors cannot be propped open. Enjoy your heat stroke. Greasy wax paper in the cardboard recycling? Sorry, that can't go in there. Normally, I just grab it as I see it, but now? I waited till the end of the day and then tell them. They had to pick it all out by hand. They had to stay late instead of leaving and pick it all out. You guys like having the radio playing in the kitchen? Sorry, not allowed. Shut it down. Grumpy lunch lady wants to sneak out early because they finished shutting down their stations? Oh, hey, where are you going, Miss Grumpy? Your shift doesn't end for another 20 minutes. Good thing I let you know, or you might left early, and we all know that would be considered stealing time. The next one is an entitled people story. Our town has a children's museum. It's cute, full of activities from baby through 9 or so. The baby and toddler areas have gates that latch for obvious reasons. Well, Karen decided she would use authority to have her toddler leave. So she opens the toddler gate and tells her child it's time to leave now. Well, her kid doesn't move and clearly wants to stay and play. Instead of closing the gate, retrieving the toddler, and going on with life, Karen decided to hold the gate open and start demanding her toddler listen. So of course other toddlers book it out, and Karen continues to hold the gate open and does nothing to prevent this and just keeps yelling at her kid. Instant chaos as parents and a grandparent scramble out to catch the escaped tots. Toddlers are running to open elevators, to balconies, and to the manager's office, and my child was booking it towards the stairs. I am about to catch her when she ducks into the art room, messy but safe, and I notice a toddler nearly to the stair landing, which are 2-story in stone, glance quickly and see Grandma going as fast as she can, but nowhere near fast enough, so I leave my kid to her painty fate and snatch up Darius and deliver him to a grateful Grandma. I hear a dad say, "Close the gate," as he has one twin in surfboard meltdown and another has just booked it out of the gate towards me in the paint room. This Karen then yells at him that it's not her job to watch his kids. She's got 3 kids of her own to handle. She is still holding open the gate. I'm acting as a shepherd of sorts between the toddlers and the stairs. Paint is everywhere with unsupervised tots not wearing their paint-proof smocks going hog wild. Apparently my daughter's favorite color is yellow. With this sudden chaos, a manager came to see what was happening, and 2 dads point to Karen, who finally picked up her child and shut the gate. Karen then tells the manager how she felt unsafe because the dad who yelled closed the gate, and demands action. By then I head over Yellow Gremlin in arms as all the tots are corralled and me and Grandma back up the dads and say how irresponsible her behavior was. Karen then launches into a tirade about how it's not her job to watch all of our children. The manager tells her she is banned and she starts screaming, so security gather her and her 3 kids and march them out. I feel bad for her children, but honestly girl, how entitled do you have to be? A simple, "I'm sorry I froze when the kids ran out. I wasn't thinking straight." Literally anything but she wanted to act like she was a victim of unsafe after releasing half a dozen toddlers into dangerous situations. Edit to add, I've had a few women named Karen reach out to me and explain the vitriol they have experienced just for having that name. From doctors to waiters to complete strangers, they are instantly maligned. I believe the stories of the women reaching out to me so personally. I am done using Karen as a shorthand for an entitled person behaving poorly and demanding a manager. The next one is an entitled parent story. I, 23F, have always had protective parents. As far back as elementary and especially middle school, I was sheltered beyond normal levels to a point that I was and still am far less independent than any of my peers, and was often encouraged or forced to not learn how to be more self-sufficient. I was never taught how to cook, do laundry, or any basic life skills, was never allowed to have a bank account, never allowed to spend time with friends, anything. A lot of the time, my parents forced me to pull away from my friends because they, especially my mother, were beyond paranoid that my friends were faking liking me and would try to hurt me or get me in trouble. In college, my parents would come to campus multiple times a week for hours at a time, and for the first half of my college years, I was forced to come home every weekend, so I never had time to make friends or get out at all. Now I'm a college graduate living on my own, with a job and my own money, but my parents still don't let up. I'm never able to leave my apartment because my parents either text, call, or come to see me. When we're on the phone, we don't even talk. We just sit there in silence for an hour or so, other than an occasional "so" or "anyway." And if there's ever a time that I don't immediately respond, they're either in a total panic or completely outraged. At this point, it's getting to concerning levels. My parents took the spare key to my apartment, only asking after they already took it and won't give it back because we sort of need a key, and when I expressed that I was uncomfortable with how little privacy I had, I was told, "Sorry you have a problem with that," and ignored. My parents come to see me most days, sometimes just sitting in my apartment, not leaving, and taking my entire night after I get off of work, so I don't get any true free time. If I get upset that they take all of my time, I'm just met with, "Well, what would you have done tonight anyway?" Because I'm expected to go to work and come home and do nothing so that they can take up my time. I have a parking pass for my apartment, and now I'm expected to change it to be set up for their car so they can come up and sit for hours. They keep buying actual junk that fills up my apartment, and I'm not allowed to get rid of any of it or say I don't want it, not allowed to try to socialize outside of them, and most importantly, not allowed to seek treatment I so desperately need for depression and gender dysphoria. Any expression that I'm unhappy is met with nuclear outrage or screaming about, I'm unhappy and miserable too and have been for 30 years. And possibly the worst part is that when I say I'd like to have more free time to myself, all I get is either, well, I'm sorry we're just so bad, or, well, you're all we have, so deal with it. I don't even know what to do about it at this point. Anyway,